Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and on December 4th we have a really big patch coming to Battlefield 5. Not only are we looking at brand new content such as Panzerstorm and the new training range, but we're also potentially getting brand new weapons as well, as recently noticed by a data mining in the game, which features a number of rifles, SMGs, assault rifles, and even sniper rifles that will potentially come to the game in the next patch, also in the future. But there is a big problem with this, and I think that this is something I want to talk about today before we have a complete understanding of what exactly is going to be patched, and this is of course balancing. Now, it's already been announced on Twitter by Florian Drunksy, one of the core designs of the game, that there will be a balancing patch already coming to the game on December 4th. And this was announced 2 days after the game had gone live to standard editions, and this really does pose a big threat for me, and I think it's something that DICE hasn't learned from before, and I want to talk about it today because as it presently looks, it looks like Battlefield could be heading in a pretty messy direction. Now, a lot of this is somewhat blown out of proportion, but the reason I'm blowing it out of proportion now is because historically everything I'm about to say is backed up by things that have happened before. And this is the growing tendency that DICE has had to have things like balancing that have been relatively needing some work, but then decided to make knee-jerk reactions and completely overhaul things and completely change things, and inevitably end up making more of a mess. And I think this is something that I feel could happen in Battlefield 5. Bearing in mind, the game Deluxe Edition has been out for a little while now, but the actual Standard Edition for the vast majority of players who are going to get the Standard Edition has only been out very shortly, 2 to 3 days at best. And already we're seeing that a balancing patch is going to come to the game, which means it's clearly been discussed by the developers and a decision has clearly been made that certain things need rebalancing already. And I'm mesmerized by this, and the reason I am is because Battlefield has done reactionary changes before, and it felt as though we were finally reaching a point where we weren't going to be doing that. And, you know, this is my big concern because, you know, this game is supposedly going to be patched every 14 days or we're going to see regular updates. However, it looks as though we're heading towards a balancing overhaul of the game in terms of weapon balance already, despite the game not being out long enough, in my opinion, to collect sufficient amounts of opinion and data to even make such a decision. Now, for me, Battlefield 5 is by no means a perfect game. There are, of course, some clear balancing things that do need some work, in my opinion. For example, tanks feel incredibly weak at the moment, and certain rifles feel incredibly overpowered. However, I still feel as though you need to wait at least a month, at the bare minimum, to let people figure out the game, let people figure out what is and isn't working, and let people just really have a good understanding of what's happening. You know, it's no different to collecting large volumes of data in a 3 to 4 day beta. You know, you look at that and you carry on, you mess around with things, but because so many people are playing, you can collect lots of data very quickly. But in Battlefield 5, we're looking at a very different game to Battlefield 1, a big breakaway, and for veterans of the franchise that's fine because it's very similar to 3 and 4, but for the vast majority of new public newcomers who have come from Battlefield 1, this game is going to be a complete shell shock to them, and of course opinions aren't necessarily going to go very well at first glance. My big concern is that DICE are seeing lots of reactions that are coming from people that says, oh yeah, I really don't like this game, I keep dying a lot, or this gun's overpowered, or that gun feels really weak, and they're not hearing what those same people have to say a week or two later when they finally got accustomed to the game. This is a very different learning curve. There is a very intuitive skill curve that has been built from the core foundations of the gameplay in Battlefield 5. And for me, my big concern is that they're seeing all of these initial reactions and potentially building patches and balancing passes that haven't really allowed anybody to get used to the formula that they've already originally created. I've had a lot of people in my comment section discuss that they've been dying a lot, and then a video later, about a week down the line, I've had a lot of people say, oh, you know, I did XYZ and it wasn't going too well, and then I did ABC, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm the man of the house and everything's going swimmingly. And that's great, like that's the kind of thing you want to see. Battlefield 5 is a game which teaches players to play better based on their engagements. If you're dying a lot, it's because you're probably doing things wrong. It's very rarely down to some kind of gunplay glitch or some kind of balancing problem. You know, there are a few one frames, there are a few weapons that do need a little bit of work, but ultimately the game doesn't necessarily have anything that would predispose you to fail that wasn't necessarily your fault. Back during the alpha, we had this big sort of debate between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 in terms of time to kill, because apparently time to kill changes are coming, and people preferred Alpha 1 ultimately. Alpha 2 was alright, but in my opinion it was a little bit too bullet spongy, and people disapproved. And my worry is that if they're changing time to kill and weapon balance already, we're going to start creeping slower and slower towards Alpha 2 and slower towards potentially even worse than Alpha 2. And if that happens, I really think Battlefield 5 is in a very bad situation. Now, there is some saving grace to this. Again, the game is being patched very frequently, and a lot of it's being run server-side now, a bit like you would see in things like Fortnite. So at least if some of these changes are made, hopefully they can be quickly unmade or remade if they aren't exactly going well. But again, this all boils down to the fact that I really feel as though DICE should have sat on the game for at least a month before any significant changes were made, because otherwise, my big question is, how do you expect people to really understand balancing and really get accustomed to what they're playing if you're willing to push a patch that could potentially change a lot of that within a few days, or at least come to a decision that you're going to change things within a few days after the game is actually formally released for the general public. That's about it from me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been me, the Tactical Brit. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in another video.